The similarity of stories in the Bible in older cultures, such as Sumer, suggests that Judaic-Christian evolved from earlier polytheistic religions. The story of the Great Flood is an example of a story that exists in Sumer and other cultures. In the Bible, this story is called Noah's Ark. In the Sumerian myth, it is called Zusurda and the Great Flood. One similarity between these two stories is obvious. In each story, one man is chosen to build a huge boat, big enough for two of each kind of animal to live on. In the biblical story, the man's name is Noah. In the Sumerian epic, his name is Zusurda. This proves my thesis because this is the only story that has this plot. A second similarity between these epics would be that a great big flood occurred and sent them on their way. This flood was given by God because he was displeased with humankind and wanted to start over. This must say something about the man he picked, so that means that Zusurda and Noah must be alike. This shows that Judaic-Christian could have evolved from cultures such as Sumer, because again, this is another similarity in the same story. In both stories, they landed in mountainous areas. When they got to these areas, they made sacrifices to their gods as a way of thanking them for their safe landings. Both myths have three very big similarities. Basically, throughout the entire story, the plot's the same, rarely changing. Not only were the stories of the Great Flood similar, but also the biblical stories of the Tower of Babel and Enmerkar and the Lord of Arada. In the beginning of both of these stories, everybody on planet Earth all speaks the same language. This language doesn't exist anymore, since in both stories, the god changed everyone's language into a new one. The first similarity isn't a big one, although it is a key one. If they all spoke the same language, then something has to have happened in order for there to be so many different languages today. The gods are the one in both stories who decide that it's time to change the language and switch it all up. Because both stories have one god or multiple gods telling them what to do and when to change their languages, it means that they have to have the same plot, and so that means that the Bible story probably originated from the Sumerian story. In the end, everybody ends up with different languages so that no one can understand each other. Both of these stories start out with the same building, although in the Bible, God thinks that they are really smart because they built it. From the Sumerian myth, the god gets mad and decides to punish the people. In the end of both stories, you get the same result, which is that there are now many languages. These similarities show that Judaic-Christian evolved from earlier polytheistic religions. A really well-known story from the Bible has been traced back to find out that Sumerians had written about it as well. This story was about the human creation. The first similarity that was found between these two stories was that the world was created in 7 days and 7 nights. Each day, a new thing would be brought to this world. In the Sumerian legend, it states that each time the gods were about to do this, they would say, "Let there be." This is what God also says in the biblical story. This is one of the biggest similarities in these two stories. The fact that they also say the same exact thing when they're about to create something is also really important. The second similarity that I found was that God created language in the diversity of human culture. Although they might have believed that he created these things two different ways, the end result remains the same. The similarity shows that the main part of the story holds true with both of the myths, which means that Judaic Christianity came from an earlier polytheistic religion. The last similarity that I could recognize was the end result of the entire story. In the end of the story from the Bible, there were now humans, animals, water, land, and much more. The same happens in the Sumerians' version. Overall, the biblical story was almost identical to that of the Sumerians. Both of these myths have three pretty important similarities. Basically, throughout the entire story of the human creation, the plot is almost exactly the same, having only a few differences.